There's basically two ways to solve this problem. I mean, this is not rocket science. One is all those billions of people on the other side of the world that desperately need energy have to be able to figure out a way to live decent lives with less energy than we're using. We have to use less energy, and everybody has to use less energy. And we have to figure out a way to make energy that doesn't involve setting coal, oil, and gas on fire and turn it into CO2. I mean, doesn't sound that hard when I put it like that, but it's a little harder than that. The first part of that equation is living decent lives without as much energy. I saw this amazing talk about 5 years ago by a guy named Ed Masria, who's a famous architect, and he gave me this slide. This is sort of an amazing story here. When we think of our carbon footprint, a lot of times we think of our cars. Turns out we actually use about twice as much energy in buildings as we use in cars. About 50% of the energy that is used in the United States is used in buildings. Only about 25% of the energy in the United States is used by all of transportation, cars, trucks, trains, planes, etc. So buildings are about twice as big of a deal as transportation. And these are some projections for how much energy was going to be used in buildings made by the US government. This is their projection out to 2030 that they made in 2005, a projection they made in 2007, a projection they made in 2009, 11, 13. So you see what's happening here is that over time, we expect less and less and less need for energy in buildings. And it's not because we turned out the lights. It's not because we're shivering in the dark. It's because architects got smarter about how to design buildings to use less energy. We got better, light bulbs and better air conditioners and better roofs and windows and doors and all kind of stuff. So we're still living in comfortable buildings, but we don't need as much energy to do it. These guys formed this group called Architecture 2030. You should look it up on the web. They've got every major commercial architect in the world has signed this pledge that by the year 2030, they will not design a single building that is not net zero energy using over the course of its life cycle. That means that a building returns as much energy during the operation of that building as it took energy to build that building in the first place. Mine the steel, and mine the iron and forge the steel and transport the beams and hang the walls and all that kind of stuff. And you're going to put all that energy back on the grid. By 2030, every commercial building in the world will be designed to that standard. Pretty amazing. Just doing that is going to save, in the United States alone, $4.5 trillion in money that we would currently have wasted if we didn't design better buildings. So this is a win-win, where you use less stuff and you put up less carbon. Here are some other predictions. Again, government predictions, in this case out to 2030, for how much solar was going to be generated in the world and how much wind was going to be generated in the world. And these dark blue lines are predictions made in 2002. The next one is made in 2004, 2006. You can see what's happened is that every year they predict ridiculously wrong futures where there's hardly any wind and solar. And every year the actual is this heavy blue line that comes up much, much farther than was projected. And then they project out another one of these ridiculous flat lines out into the future. What are these people smoking? I mean, look at the blue line. That's what's actually happened. It's not just better than these predictions. It's like ridiculously better than these predictions. The predictions have been completely off the map wrong in terms of the uptake of solar and wind energy. The reason why is because it's so cheap. Nobody expected this to happen. When I graduated high school in 1977, solar panels were $77 a watt. Solar panels are now selling for less than 36 cents a watt. They're 200 times less expensive than when I was in high school. It doesn't feel like that long ago that I was in high school, but it's like amazing. Imagine if other stuff was 200 times cheaper. Imagine if your car cost 200 times less than it did in 1977. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's 5 times cheaper than it was in 2011. In much of the world, it's already cheaper to build new solar and wind than it is to build new coal and gas. And very soon, like in 2 or 3 years, it will be cheaper to just mothball the existing plants that you've already spent billions of dollars on and build new solar and wind farms instead of operating the existing gas and coal. It is amazing. And billions of people need energy at a time when we've discovered how to make carbon-free energy much more cheaply than gas and coal. Are those people gonna dig deep and buy extra expensive gas and coal-fired electricity? No, of course they're not. This is really good news. Let's see, what am I doing here? These are maps of how much sun falls in a year in Germany on the left and in the United States on the right. Now, Germany went from getting 4% of their energy from wind and sun in the year 2000 to 32% of their energy from wind and sun last year. Eightfold increase, 700% increase in wind and sun. Germany gets less sun than Alaska. Imagine if we got serious about doing this in the United States. Oh my God, look if we did this in New Mexico or Arizona and then ran electric lines out to the, now electric lines don't carry electricity very efficiently with AC, but we've got this new technology with direct current lines that could take electricity made in Arizona and keep the lights on in New York City. I need a drink of water, I'm losing it. Better. Sun doesn't shine at night. You need a way to store the electricity. Batteries. Way back in the dark days of 2010, batteries cost $1,000 a kilowatt hour. And batteries, big industrial batteries, are now down to about $400 a kilowatt hour. And Bloomberg estimates that by 2030 they'll be about $100 a kilowatt hour. And that was supposed to be a very optimistic forecast made 2 years ago. The Chevy Bolt is currently already beat that estimated 2030 number, and it's only 2017. And that's before next year when the Gigafactory comes and they build these other things. These technologies have just absolutely blown away expectations on both generation, transmission, and storage. 8 years early on this Chevy Bolt. Yes, there's a toilet on this slide. It is not a suggestion. I want you to wait. It is going to cost some money to convert the entire world economy off of coal, oil, and gas. And that's what's got to happen, right? I mean, it's not enough to just ride your bike to work. We've got to stop burning coal, oil, and gas. And it's got to happen pretty quick. It's going to cost some money. It's going to cost a lot of money. How much money is it going to cost? It's going to cost, according to people who've studied this, about 1% of the world economy. Okay? You guys know what that is? GDP, we call it, the gross domestic product, the value of all the goods and services sold in the world in a year. Anybody have any idea? Maybe not. How much is the world's GDP? Anybody know? Guess? $75 trillion a year. $75 trillion a year. 1% of that is $750 billion a year. That's a lot of money. That's bigger than the US defense budget, right? That's a lot of money. But 1% of the global economy is about what it cost 100 years ago to retrofit all of the world's cities with indoor plumbing. Imagine the cost. They had to dig up every street in New York and London and Paris and lay sewer pipes, and they had to knock out tenement walls 20 stories high, and they had to run hot and cold running water, and they had to knock out all these internal partitions and put in sinks and toilets and showers, and oh, are we happy they did that. You know, how many of you would rather that the global economy was 1% bigger and you still had to poop in the street? But it wasn't gone, that money, that 1% of the world economy. Imagine what it did for plumbers. Imagine what it did for plumbing suppliers. Imagine what it did for the grocery store down the street from that plumber, or for the children of that plumber who could then go to college or whatever. The money is never gone, right? It goes round and round and round. That's kind of how capitalism works. These are my grandparents. That's Max and Florence. And it was their generation, not them personally, but their generation that did that plumbing retrofit that cost 1% of the world economy. These brave people. But they weren't done when they did the plumbing. They finished up, 20 years later doing rural electrification. Imagine what it costs to run separate little copper wires out to every farm in Kansas. Every house, every apartment gets its own electricity. Holy mackerel, that was a lot of money. It was about 1% of the world economy. And they didn't go broke doing that. They did fine doing that. They finished up after that and they, went and fought the Nazis. These are my parents. That's Margie and that's Bob. And their generation picked up the torch from my grandparents' generation, and they built the interstate highways for 1% of the world economy. And they fought the Cold War, and they sent people to the moon, for goodness sakes. These people were like no slouches. That's me and my wife when I had hair. My generation did it again. We spent more than 1% of the world economy building PCs. And then when we were done with that, we got rid of billions of landline phones and replaced them with these things, right? These little cat video monitor things. And it cost untold money. It cost like 1% of the world economy to replace perfectly good landlines with really cool, iPhone thingies. It's what we do. It's what our ancestors have done. It's what our civilization has done for centuries, is tossed out perfectly good old-fashioned technologies and replaced them with more expensive but better technologies. This is just what we do. These are my kids. That's Matt and that's Nate. And they get to do it again. They get to toss bazillions of coal and oil and gas infrastructure and replace it with infrastructure that won't destroy the world. And it'll cost money, and it'll lead to opportunity, and that's just how it goes. This is what we do. You can sort of tell a story about the past which colors your view of the future. There's a well-trodden path, a well-known story that goes something like this. Our world is built on extraction. There's value in a lump of coal. And when you dig it out of the ground, you can sell it to somebody, and they can set it on fire and sell the energy from that fire to somebody else who uses it to make products and services to sell for a profit. And round you go until you have a $75 trillion a year global economy. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's how history really works. Maybe that's how our world is made, is out of extraction. But it's a grim story. It's a hopeless story that basically says to us that when you stop digging that stuff out of the ground, that the house of cards will fall. And that our children and our grandchildren will go back to living in the Middle Ages, and there will be billions of extra ones of them. And what the heck are they going to do for light and heat and food? I don't want that to be the real world. I don't want that to be the story, that our descendants are going to shiver in the dark when they run out of this magic substance that made our civilization possible. I prefer this other story, that we create our well-being, that it comes from in here, that it's not from stuff we dig out of the ground. It comes from ingenuity and creativity and hard work. Not from the ground, but from the sweat of our brows and the sparks in our souls. And we are not running out of those things. And the children are going to be all right. Thank you.